Hello class. Today's lesson is going to be centered around fairy tales. I know many of us still like fairy tales, and as a child it was probably one of our favorite things in terms of bedtime stories. I mean, I loved hearing about fairy tales just before bed. Some of my favorites were Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, Goldilocks. Um, I guess I'd like to hear what are some of your favorites, you know? Oh, that's lovely. Oh, oh, wonderful. Actually, the fairy tale you'll be doing in class today is The Little Red Riding Hood. And for persons who may not know what a hood is, basically, it's just this. This is the hood of, my jacket. So usually we call this a hoodie now, right? So I guess our story would be we could rename it the Little Red Riding Hoodie, but that doesn't quite sound right. So today's lesson is going to be centered around the Little Red Riding Hood. So I have handouts for everybody, and we're going to start by practicing our reading. Uh, you're going to go back into your usual groups, the usual groups of five, and I'm going to start by reading aloud section 1 of The Little Red Riding Hood. Okay? Once upon a time, there lived a little country girl, the prettiest creature who was ever seen. Her mother had a little red riding hood made for her. Everybody called her Little Red Riding Hood. One day her mother said to her, "Go, my dear, and see how your grandmother is doing, for I hear she has been very ill." Okay? So that's the beginning of our story. Can anybody tell me where you think this story could possibly go from here? Right, remember we have a little girl and her little Red Riding Hood, and she's going to go and visit her very sick grandmother. And I know some of you may already know the story, okay? But for those persons who don't, I would love to hear what you think is going to happen in the rest of the story. Okay? No, Little Red Riding Hood is not going to become a superhero. I'm sorry. She's still going to remain a little girl in the story. Well, yes, she's going to travel. She's going to travel because her grandmother is very ill. What happens in a lot of traveling stories? Right? She's probably going to go on an adventure. She's probably going to meet a villain. You know, there has to be some sort of conflict in every story, yes. What else do you think is going to happen? Oh, well, that's a good idea. A love interest? She's a little girl, so maybe not quite appropriate. Okay, so the grandmother is going to appear in the story when she, gets to her. Oh, awesome. All right, thank you guys. So I know you're thinking, so you have some expectations of what's to come in your story. Okay, all right, everyone. So group 1 is going to have section 2, group 3, 4, 5. Yes, you're going to have a different section of the story. Now, I want you guys to sit down and think about, read the story, and then go around the classroom, and each group, we're going to try and put together the correct path for the story. So that we want to make sure it flows. So each section, it's not going to be numbered. So you're going to have to decide as a class how the story goes. And when you're finished, we'll decide if, it makes sense, if it's a good story, and you want to pay close attention to what is going to be the end of the story, because we're going to later decide if, the story ended well, if you could come up with a different story. The ultimate goal of today's class is going to be you are going to write your own fairy tale. Isn't that exciting? Okay, it's not going to be that difficult. We're going to go through. I'm gonna help you along the way. We're gonna, come up with ideas based on some very famous fairy tales. So you can choose. You can pick and choose. You can choose from The Princess and the Pea, The Wizard of Oz. Yes, and you can come up with similar sounding stories. It's not gonna be damn long. We're going to have a story in about 3 paragraphs. So you're going to write your story, the beginning, what happens in the beginning, second paragraph, what's the middle of the story, and the middle of the story usually involves some sort of conflict that the hero or heroine has to overcome. And then for the big finale, we're going to have a finish, the ending of the story. Okay? And you can end your story in whatever manner you want. All right, so let's get started, class. Pick up your handouts and first spend 5 minutes reading and figuring out what themes your section is bringing out, and then you're going to decide how the story flows, paying close attention to the end of the story. All right, let's get started.